Sometimes love doesn't leave with noise. It doesn't slam doors or break glasses. It becomes quiet, almost invisible. And that silence is the loudest thing I've ever heard. I wish I could tell you the exact moment it happened. The second when warmth turned into distance. The day when your voice stopped feeling like home. But the truth is, I don't know when it started. All I know is I felt it. A tiny shift in the air between us. A pause in your laughter that stayed a little too long. A hug that felt like you were already halfway gone. And the scariest part, nothing looked broken, yet everything felt different. I kept asking myself, is it just a bad day? Am I overthinking? Or is love quietly slipping through my fingers? Because when you love someone deeply, you don't notice the storm, you notice the change in the wind. And somewhere in that wind, my heart started whispering, something is wrong with my love. Tonight, I want to talk about that feeling. The one we try to ignore, the one we pray is just in our heads, the one that slowly teaches us how fragile love can be and how brave a heart must become to face it. I don't know when it began. There was no loud moment, no dramatic goodbye, no storm that warned me to run for shelter. It was quieter than that. It was softer, almost invisible. The kind of change you only notice when your heart suddenly feels heavier in places that used to feel like home. I kept searching for a reason, a single event, a mistake I could point at and say, that's where it happened. But love doesn't always break in obvious ways. Sometimes it fades like evening light, slowly, patiently, until one day you realize the room isn't bright anymore and you don't remember when the sun left. I started noticing the silence first, not the peaceful silence that feels safe and warm, but the kind that stretches too long between words, the pauses that make you wonder if the conversation ended without you noticing. The space between us began to grow, not in distance, but in feeling. We were still close, still together, still saying the same things, but something inside those words had changed. I told myself it was stress, life, responsibilities. The world is heavy, and love sometimes gets tired carrying it. That's what I wanted to believe. Because believing anything else meant admitting that something fragile inside us had started to crack. Love has a rhythm, a quiet music only two hearts can hear. And when that rhythm changes, you feel it before you understand it. You notice the missed beats, the slower responses, the warmth that arrives a few seconds late. It's not loud enough to call a problem, but it's strong enough to make your chest feel tight at night when you're alone with your thoughts. I remember the way your laughter used to arrive without effort. It used to fill the air like sunlight through a window. And then one day I realized I had started waiting for it, waiting for something that used to come naturally, waiting like someone standing at a door that no one knocks on anymore. I tried to ignore the feeling, because love teaches you patience. It teaches you to believe, to trust, to hold on even when things don't make sense. So I held on tighter. I loved harder. I spoke softer. I listened more carefully. I convinced myself that effort could fix what I didn't understand. But the strange thing about love is that it doesn't need grand disasters to feel different. Sometimes all it takes is a shift in attention, a change in energy, a moment where you realize you're the only one still holding the thread, trying to keep the connection from slipping away. I kept asking myself if I was imagining it, if maybe the problem was me. Maybe I was too sensitive, too observant, too afraid of losing something beautiful. Because fear has a way of dressing itself as intuition, and intuition has a way of sounding like fear. But deep down, there was a quiet voice that wouldn't stop whispering. A voice that simply said, something feels different. Love used to feel like standing in sunlight, warm, safe, effortless. And now it felt like standing in shade trying to remember what warmth felt like. Not cold, not gone, just less. I began to notice the little things, the messages that came later than they used to, the conversations that ended sooner, the way your attention drifted when I spoke. Not in a cruel way, not in an obvious way, just enough to make my heart hesitate before speaking again. It's strange how love makes you brave and fragile at the same time. Brave enough to give someone your whole heart, fragile enough to feel every tiny shift in how they hold it. I never wanted perfection. I never expected constant fireworks or endless romance. Love isn't supposed to be dramatic every day. It's supposed to be steady, quiet, safe. That's what made the change so confusing. Because nothing looked broken from the outside. We still talked, still laughed, still shared the same space. But something invisible had moved, like a painting slightly crooked on a wall. Everything looks normal until you notice the angle, and then you can't stop seeing it. I wondered if you felt it too. If you lay awake at night sensing the same quiet distance growing between us, or if this was a storm only happening inside my chest. Love makes you ask dangerous questions. Questions you're afraid to say out loud because once they exist, they can't be taken back. Questions like, are we okay? Questions like, are you still here with me? Questions like, did something change? Or did I just notice too late? I started remembering the beginning, the way everything F music felt simple, easy, natural. The way your presence used to calm every storm inside me. The way your voice felt like a place I could rest. And then I started comparing. Not intentionally, not unfairly, just naturally. Because when you know what warmth feels like, you notice when the temperature drops. I kept searching for reassurance in small moments, a longer hug, a deeper conversation, a look that lasted a few seconds more than usual. I was searching for proof that love was still as alive as I remembered it. And sometimes I found it, small sparks that reminded me of everything we had built, moments that made me feel silly for doubting, moments that made me believe the distance was only temporary. But the quiet feeling always returned, like a tide that pulls back no matter how many times the waves reach the shore. I began to understand that love doesn't disappear overnight. It changes shape, it shifts, it evolves, and sometimes it drifts. The hardest part wasn't the fear of losing you, it was the fear of losing the version of us that once felt unbreakable. I kept smiling, kept showing up, kept loving you the only way I knew how. Because when you love someone deeply, you don't stop loving them just because something feels different. You love them harder, you try more, you hope louder. Hope is a beautiful and dangerous thing. It keeps your heart open even when it's tired. It keeps you believing even when doubt sits quietly in the corner of every thought. I wanted to believe we were just going through a phase, that love sometimes gets quiet before it grows louder again. That distance sometimes appears before two people find their way back to each other. Because love is worth fighting for, worth waiting for, worth trusting even when it feels uncertain. And yet, the feeling stayed, a soft, persistent whisper in my chest. Something is wrong with my love. Keynote 2. Love something. Times changes without warning, and the hardest battles are the ones fought inside the heart. Love is supposed to feel like a place you can rest without asking for permission, a place where your heart can sit down, breathe, and stop preparing for impact. That's how it began for me. It felt safe, natural, effortless, like something that didn't need to be explained because it simply existed in every look, every silence, every moment we shared. And that's why the change felt so confusing. There was no clear reason to panic, no dramatic argument, no final sentence that split everything in half. Instead, there was a quiet shift that slowly moved through the spaces between us. A shift so gentle that I kept convincing myself it wasn't real. But love has a strange way of teaching you to listen to feelings you can't explain. I remember when being near you felt like standing at the center of the world. Everything made sense there. Even chaos felt manageable. Even silence felt full. It wasn't about grand gestures or perfect days. It was about the way your presence made ordinary moments feel meaningful. And then one day I noticed something I couldn't unnotice. I started feeling lonely while sitting next to you. That realization didn't arrive loudly. It crept in slowly like a thought that wasn't fully formed yet. At first, I dismissed it. Everyone feels distant sometimes. Everyone has heavy days. Love isn't supposed to be perfect every hour of every day. So I told myself to be patient. I told myself that real love isn't about constant excitement. It's about stability, comfort, quiet understanding. It's about staying even when things feel ordinary. But this didn't feel ordinary. This felt like something had quietly stepped back while I wasn't looking. I began to notice how conversations changed. They became shorter, simpler, less curious. We still talked, but the depth started fading. Questions that used to lead to stories now ended in brief answers. Moments that once stretched into laughter now ended in silence. And I kept wondering if you noticed too, because when love is shared, distance should be shared too. But this distance felt one sided, like I was the only one standing in the space between who we were and who we had become. I started searching for the version of us that used to exist so effortlessly. I replayed memories like songs I didn't want to forget. The way you used to look at me when I spoke, the way time used to disappear when we were together, the way everything once felt simple. Memories are beautiful and cruel at the same time. They remind you of what's possible while quietly showing you what's missing. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong, because admitting that something changed meant risking the idea that it might not change back, and hope can make you brave in ways you don't expect. I tried to love louder without saying a word. I gave more attention, more patience, more understanding. I listened carefully, hoping to hear the warmth I remembered hiding somewhere in your voice. Sometimes I found it. Small sparks that reminded me why I fell in love in the first place. Small moments that felt like home again. But those moments started feeling like rare sunsets instead of daily sunlight. And that difference changed everything. I started asking myself questions I didn't want to ask. Was I holding on to a memory instead of a reality? Was I fighting for something that was already quietly slipping away? Or was this just what love looks like after the excitement fades? No one really prepares you for this part of love. Everyone talks about beginnings, about butterflies and first moments and magical connections. But very few people talk about the quiet middle, the part where love becomes real and complicated, and sometimes confusing. The part where you don't know if you're growing together or growing apart. I kept telling myself that love requires effort, that relationships go through seasons, that nothing stays the same forever. And I believe that. I still believe that. But I also learned that effort should feel shared. Love shouldn't feel like a one person rescue mission. And yet, I kept trying to rescue something I couldn't fully understand. I tried to ignore the growing hesitation in my heart, the small pause before reaching for your hand, the tiny voice asking questions I didn't want to answer. Because the truth is, losing love slowly can feel more painful than losing it suddenly. When love ends suddenly, at least you have a moment to point to, a clearer memory that marks the change. But when love changes slowly, there is no single moment to blame. There is only a long stretch of uncertainty, and uncertainty is exhausting. You start second guessing your own feelings. You wonder if you're expecting too much. You wonder if you're being unfair. You wonder if the problem exists only in your mind. You become both the detective and the suspect in your own heart. I kept reminding myself of everything we had built, every promise, every shared dream, every quiet moment that once felt so certain. Because love isn't just a feeling, it's a history, a collection of memories that become part of who you are. And letting go of that history feels like letting go of a part of yourself. I didn't want to lose that part of me, so I stayed patient. I stayed hopeful. I stayed. But staying doesn't always mean standing still. Sometimes staying means slowly realizing that something has already moved. I began to notice how effort started feeling heavier, how conversations required more energy, how silence started feeling less comfortable. I missed the ease, the simplicity, the way love used to flow without effort. I missed feeling certain. Certainty is a quiet gift in love. You don't notice it when you have it, but you feel its absence immediately when it disappears. And suddenly, I was full of questions instead of certainty. I wondered if love was supposed to feel this fragile, if this quiet distance was normal, if every relationship eventually reaches this point where everything feels slightly off balance, or if this was the moment where love quietly changes direction. I realized that the hardest part wasn't the fear of losing you. It was the fear of admitting that something had already changed. Because once you admit that, you can't pretend anymore. You can't ignore the silence. You can't dismiss the distance. You can't convince your heart that everything is exactly the same. You have to face the truth that love sometimes changes shape in ways you don't expect. And facing that truth requires courage. More courage than falling in love ever did. Because falling in love is easy. It feels natural. It feels exciting. It feels like stepping into the unknown. It feels like standing in a place where answers don't exist yet. And yet, I kept standing in a place where answers don't exist yet. And yet, I kept standing there, still loving, still hoping, still wondering if the warmth I remembered was still waiting for us somewhere ahead.